Good morning. We are in Hemshech Tzaddik Dalet, page 116, which corresponds to pages 1115 through 1117 in Ayin Beis, volume 2. Sorry, did I say 1115? No, 1155.
We're on page 116, you said, right?
Yeah. 1150, one second, let me make sure. Yeah, 1155 through 1157, my mistake. Okay. Okay, so what are we learning? So we're really reviewing what we already learned in Ayin Beis about the first level of bittul of Ur. The first level of bittul of Ur, and what he calls heder tfisas mokim. As we'll learn later, just for contrast purposes, this bittul is in context and being in the presence of something beyond the Ur, the source. So the Ur is bottled to it because it feels. Because it feels and senses its source, and therefore, like the Chacham Katan, like a wise person in the presence of a wiser person. But as we'll learn later, in the deeper levels of bittul, not the first level, later levels, there's the Ur itself, even when it's not in the presence of the Mokar, so to speak, it would also have bittul. But I don't want to go there right now, I just wanted to make that point. Okay, so in heder tfisas mokim, he used the expression from the Zohar, from Keser. Keser ilah, I'm just reading from the bottom of the page 115. Kisrei ilah, even though it's a great powerful light, kadman, afagav the kadman, tzach mitzuchtzach. And we learned earlier in Ayin Beis what those three levels are. But bottom line is it's a powerful light. Ulchamhu, it's dark or darkened. Kodem ilus ilus, in the presence or before or in contrast to the ilus ilus, to the source of sources. So the Frierdiker Rebbe is adding here that Ayin Beis doesn't add. He's talking more about this level of ucham. What is ucham? It's not just that it's lacking light. In other words, compared to a greater light, you could say this light pales in comparison, or doesn't even pale. It's not considered light because it's in the presence of something much greater. But he says more than that. It's ucham. It's an actual state of darkness. So the Frierdiker Rebbe is emphasizing that point, that it's not just that it's bottle and not Ur, it's actually a state of darkness. And that's what we're in the middle of discussing. So let me just review what we've learned so far inside. So ucham is shachrus, which is darkness. Shcheres ke'erev, shacher. Shcheres ke'erev is referring to an erev is a black raven. A raven is black, so we say that her hair is black like a raven. This is common in the psukim, giving examples. So shcheres ke'erev. So we're talking about darkness. He says, just like there's the dark is in the colors, you have the color black versus which is the opposite of the color white. Same thing here, shachrus is the opposite of light. So if black to white is darkness to light, that's essentially what he's saying here. And that's uchamhu. And here's what the Frierdiker Rebbe emphasized. I'm reading the last line on page 115 and turning to page 116. Who the loizul bovad she'ena eir. Not only is it not eir, kimshu eid hepach ha'eir. That's the emphasis here. So like black is opposite of white, darkness is the opposite of light. It's not just the absence of light. The eir hu gilui, eir is a level of gilui. So now we have black and white, white and black, light and dark, And now he's saying light is gili, it reveals. V'ucham perushay, and what is the meaning of ucham then? The be'erech ilus ha'ilus, eine inyan ha'gili klal. That be'erech, in relation to, or in contrast to, ilus ha'ilus, the cause of all causes. Well, let's not say all. It doesn't say ilus kala ilus. Ilus ha'ilus, the cause of causes, it's not gili at all. So we're still in the middle of this discussion. I'll just continue reading right now, even though we read it. It's worthwhile continuing, and then we'll continue on. Ukamaimer, and remember, these two Maimorim that we just, the quote of the Keser, Ucham, and now this Maimer are both from Zayar, are both quoted in Ayin Beis, except here there's more elaboration on it. So it comes Ukamaimer. So Tzaddik Rebbe now ties it together. That the Maimer says, Kol Nuhuroyin Mischaschoyin Kameh. All the lights are darkened Kameh before him, before you. So you see here the word again, Cheshech, clearly says Cheshech. So in Ayin Beis, he just brought it to bring out the expression that the Oyer doesn't have any tfisas mokim compared to a higher state. And here the Tzaddik Rebbe is explaining more the emphasis on the darkness, on the blackness of it. So, okay. The Eina Pirushem Cheshech Mamish. When you say that all the lights are darkened before you, or before Kamei, before him. Before him, right. So when you say that Mischaschoyin, he says it doesn't mean Cheshech Mamish. Doesn't mean actual darkness. It means a relative darkness. And let's see how he explains this, because we still need to figure out the second half, that it's not just the absence of light, it's also a state of darkness. But we'll soon see where he's going with this. Okay. It's only to give an example, like when you say Yom v'Layla, day and night, Shem Er v'Cheshech, this light, that's Er, light, and Cheshech, darkness, Lichtig and Finster in Yiddish, which means bright and dark. Hari HaCheshech hu hepech ha'er. When you say Yom v'Layla, what are you saying? Cheshech is the opposite of light. So he says the same thing is here. When we say Kol Nu'uroi Mischaschoyin Kamei, it doesn't mean Cheshech Mamish, it means the opposite of light. So he's going to say like this. Kenu ba'atayir oyer, shehu gili, hine ucham hu afoche. So the same thing is with the description when you say something is oyer, light. What is light? Light is gili. That's what light means. It's revealing. So ucham is the opposite of that. Koloimer, she'enei mi'inyan hagili klal. Because when you say something is, if you just said that the light is overshadowed or is basically insignificant, like when you say shraga betira mayahana, so basically the expression is, it doesn't say there's no flame, it says a flame, betira, in the middle of the bright daylight or sunlight, mayahana. What hana? What benefit is there from it? It doesn't say that the flame is a state that's opposite of gilui.
A candle.
Yeah. It doesn't say that the candle, the flame of the candle is dark, even though it's true it darkens that area, but there the focus is that when you have a brighter light, a lesser light of a candle doesn't have any significance, doesn't have any value. But here you're saying further, you're saying ucham. It's hepech inyan hagili. In other words, it's not just that it's overshadowed and overpowered by a greater light. It's hepech, that's his words. Okay. We need to understand what he wants to make the point, so we have to really learn the rest to see what he's going to explain. All this is the Tzaddik Rebbe's addition, the rest of this page, until the top of the next page. Because what's unclear to me, at least right now, is first he said that it's not just the absence of light, it's also a state of heder, what he calls hepech ha'er. Then he said it's not choshech mamish. It's only an expression used to explain that is the opposite of light. So what is the difference between choshech mamish and opposite of light? I'm not sure. So just leave that hanging, leave that open. Let's see how he's going to explain this whole thing, and then we'll tie it all together. So things are not exactly clear.
Darkness. Choshech is darkness. Keser is not dark, but
listen, you're giving your explanation. I'm suggesting before you give, let's see what the Frierdiker Rebbe is going to explain, and then we'll get there. Okay. Because he says something stronger than darkness. He says it's Hepech Inyan Hagili, Einami Inyan Hagili Klal. So we'll see. Let's see what he's going to say now. Okay. V'yuven zel derech haklal hayedua, and we'll understand this al derech haklal hayedua. Similar to the general rule or the general premise or axiom, the gili legabe atzmei hu helam legabe hazulas. So again, classic Frierdiker Rebbe style, he categorizes things. He says a klal, a known rule or a known principle, maybe even better, a known principle, that gilui legabe atzmei, something that's revealed to you, is concealed in regarding the other, another. No, that which is revealed to you is concealed to another. And the opposite is also true. V'gili legabe azulas, and something that is seen as a gili revealed to another, hu helam legabe atzmei, is a form of concealment in context, in regarding you, to the person himself. He's going to explain what this means. I mean, we could surmise, but he's going to explain. When we say here, the intention when they say to yourself and another, hu mashpia makabel. Talking about a mashpia and makabel. Like a teacher and a student, but mashpia makabel is broader than teacher. Rav and Talmud is one form of mashpia makabel. But mashpia makabel can be many different ways. Mashpia makabel could be spouses, it can be parent and child. There are many forms, but mashpia makabel could also be not even human. The sun is a mashpia, the moon is a makabel. But the point he wants to say is that mashpia makabel is atzmai. That's the mashpia. So basically he's saying something that is revealed to the mashpia is concealed from the recipient, and something revealed to the recipient is a form of concealment in the context of the mashpia. Okay. The gili lahamashpia hu helam lahamakabel. A gili to the mashpia, meaning something he understands and is clear to him, is a concealment from the recipient. Va'gili lemakabel hu helam lamashpia. And that which is revealed to the makabel is a concealment of the mashpia. But pashtus, what he means, and we'll see if I'm correct when we learn further, is, well, we talk about this many times with Tzimtzum. The mashpia on his own, before he begins to transmit to a student or to a recipient, has a certain amount of oir. That's what a mashpia is. If he were to stay in that state, the makabel would not be able to receive it. That's why one is a giver, one is a recipient. Take the sun and the moon, for example. Sunlight is reflected in the moon, but it's not close to the intensity of the moon. So the truth is that when it gets to the makabel, that which in the mashpia is in full glory, gilui, revealed, from the makabel's point of view, is in a state of concealment. Because the makabel does not see and cannot see or experience the full mashpia. On the other hand, that which the makabel does experience is already a concealment legabe the mashpia. Mashpia has to limit the flow. In other words, if you were to hear the makabel speak, for example, or you were to stand as a side, let's say we were a third party watching a student receiving from a teacher. That what the teacher gives to the student, you'd say, what you're hearing now is, from the point of view of the teacher, is a concealed state. Because you're hearing a little piece of all the brilliance that he has. On the other hand, that which is, if you heard the mashpia speak, without any limitations, the student, the makabel, could not understand it, because that's exactly why one is a mashpia, one is a makabel. That's b'pashtus what he's saying here. And this is going to explain the whole concept of keser and ucham and so on. But let's continue. He has much more to say on this topic. Okay. Now, if you could see, I don't know if you're noticing this, but the signin, the language of the Frierdiker Rebbe is very different than the language of Ayin Beis. Like this type of conversation is very abstract. He gives a klal that a helam lagabe atzmei, gilul lagabe atzmei is a helam lagabe azulas, and vice versa. Mashpia makabel, and in a way it's very chkiridik almost. Chkirid means it's very written in a very philosophical type of abstract form. But he's going to explain now what this means. So he says like this, okay. The move on, it's understood, the ene dema kavona, beteichen hanese, Pirush gili v'helim, k'meishu l'gabe ha'mashpia, l'k'meishu l'gabe ha'makabel. Okay, so he has now another point, saying it's understandable that when you say the concept of gili and helim, it doesn't have the same meaning. Teichen hanesa means, doesn't have the same implication, the same meaning. Teichen hanesa is an implication, teichen hanesa. The content of the subject matter, when you say gili helim, how it's by the mashpia, gili helim has a different type of meaning and significance and implication than gili helim when you talk about the makabel. Now that again is a very abstract statement. What does that mean exactly? So he's going to explain. Dihine, because now, ima yesh shaskolas v'izchakmus v'avona v'asoge. Says 4 different expressions. Haskola is conceiving. Haskola is an idea. His chakmus is like conceiving. Havana is understanding, and hasoga is comprehension. Basically, the two, haskola and his chakmus is usually chachma. Havana v'hasoga is usually bina. But he says all 4 expressions here. He says so. Even though shaskola v'izchakmus v'havana v'hasoga ari yesh lehem seder mesuder, even though they have an organized process, there's an organized process of how intelligence evolves, how intelligence emerges. The chek kavua, with a very chek kavua means a unwavering governing rule. Chek kavua is when you say something does not change. This is how it is. It's basically a set of what do I want to say? A series of steps that are unwavering. This is how it is. Chek kavua. That's how it's structured. The Ayin ve'efen is galusam. The Ayin in the concept and the efen and the manner of their revelation. Simply put, the process of seichel, haskola, he says, his chakmus, havana v'asoga, all that has a set in a etched in stone process, the way it gets revealed. So based on that, you would think that Gili and Helam, like in other words, a seichel that's first concealed and then revealed, would be equal for all people. And yet, he's saying, no, there's a fundamental difference between the mashpia and makabel. Makol mokim, nevertheless, hari'in haskolas v'asogas hamashpia ba'atzmei, the manner or the way the idea is conceived and understood by the mashpia. In other words, the way the mashpia understands something, ba'atzmei, im atzmei, within himself and with himself. In other words, the way he communicates to himself, not to a recipient. Hu ba'efen acher legamri is completely in a different way, a manner, mikameishu efen hasogas hamakabel v'havanose. From the manner, from the way the makabel understands and comprehends the idea, in the manner and the way that the recipient receives an idea and a comprehension of an idea. Again, if you read this alone, it still remains. He hasn't yet explained what he means. He's just making a statement. But we continue reading, and I'm trying to fill in a bit to make it a little easier to understand. But this is you'll find the Friedrich Rebbe, they're often this type of approach. He states things in a very abstract, conceptual way. And often he will explain it, but sometimes we need more explanation when we discuss it. So far, let me just sum up what we've learned so far. He's coming to explain the idea. Remember, the whole thing began to explain that ucham is not inyan hagili klal. What does that mean exactly? In other words, it's not about just darkness. It's not gili, it's the opposite of gili. So he's explaining it that there's a klal, there's a principle about how things work, mashpia and makabel. And now it's that what is revealed by the mashpia within himself is concealed by the makabel, is a state of concealment by the recipient, and vice versa. That which is revealed by the recipient is a state of concealment by the mashpia. But then he went further and said that the way Helam and Gili functions by the mashpia is very different than the way it is by the makabel. So even though the order, everything always begins. You begin with chokhmah. First starts a spark of an idea. Whether you're a mashpia or a makabel, whether you're a great scholar or you're a simple student, everything goes chokhmah bina das. He doesn't talk about das here. You go askola, hischakmus, havana v'asoga. I'm not going right now into the difference between all the four different expressions. But it goes, you start with an idea, and then you develop it. In that, everything is equal. He says, chay kavua. That's the rule. This is how it works. And yet, the way it works by the mashpia is very different than the way it is by the makabel as he receives the idea. And he's going to explain now. Still didn't explain it. He's going to say it like this. V'hainu. This means, v'hainu, shalavad zeis, besides the fact, shezeh mashpia v'zeh makabel, besides the fact that they're different, simply the fact, one is a mashpia, one is the teacher, one is the transmitter of the idea, one is the recipient of the idea. So there's one difference there, even though he hasn't spelled out what the difference is, but it's clearly different. They're different levels. It says, besides that, one second. He didn't say that besides. Continuing to explain this first thing. Shamashpia v'makabel chalukim b'mailas keiches hagluyim b'askola v'asoga. So as soon as you say one is a mashpia, a transmitter, and one is a recipient, they are distinguished. They're different in the quality of their revealed faculties in askola and asoga, in conceiving idea and understanding an idea. So though, yes, the process is similar, there's chachma, then comes bina, haskola, and then hasoga, but the first distinction between them is that one is a mashpia, one is a makabel. Their very faculties of conceiving and comprehending are different. However, he says, but this distinction, which remember, it's a lavadzes, he's still going to go to a bigger difference between the two. He says, this one is ribuy umiyat levad. This is only a matter of quantity or even quality, but one is more, one is less. In other words, the mashpia, because he's so much more intelligent, much more learned, more experienced, more brilliant, whatever you want to call it. So by him, his chakmus and his hasoga, his askola and his hasoga is on a higher level. But is it a fundamentally, qualitatively, completely different level? Not necessarily. And by the makabel, it's on a lower level. Miyut, the ribui and miyut means more and less. It usually refers to quantity. But the reason I said quality, because even if quality, it's also quantity within quality, so to speak. We're not talking about two different worlds. We're talking about a matter of they're both intelligent people. One is the mashpia, one is the makabel. So there is a distinction clearly, but it's still only ribui and miyut. Shamashpia yedei ribui haskolas. The mashpia knows many ideas. The ribui hasagas and many explanations, you can say, or many comprehensions. This is basically Chochmah Bina. What means Ribui? Means a person who's on a mashpia has the years of learning and experience and intelligence that he's developed, that he has a lot of ideas. And he has a lot of ways of explaining them, or ways of, hasagas means a lot of comprehension in the ideas, because he worked on it. So let's say you talk about, let's say a teacher, a scholar who's teaching children Chumash. So it's very clear that the scholar, that's the teacher, has a lot more, both in Haskalah and Hasaga than the students. V'amakabel yodei rak ma'at. And the recipient only knows a little. He may just know Aleph Beis, he may just know Chumash, or he may just know some ideas. So what's the distinction Mishpia and Makabel? Is basically a matter of quantity, with some quality, but quantity in essentially you know more, he knows less. The ribuy miyut hurak kamus bilvad. Okay, it says this explicitly. And we say ribuy miyut, more and less, is only quantity. Okay, but now he's going to qualify. The im hayes, we still didn't get to the levad zeis. Remember, this is all the first thing. He's saying that there's a fundamental difference between Mashpia, Makabel, and Gilia and Helen. The first difference he's saying is a difference, but it's more in quantity. But he's still qualifying. What does that mean, quantity? Exactly what I indicated earlier. And even though when it comes to intelligence is not like apples in a crate. Like you could say someone who has 100 apples, another person has 1 apple. That's completely quantity. It has nothing to do with quality. It's the same apple. You just have 100 of them. But by scholar, you can't say that. You can't say that person who has more ideas is just a matter of having more quantity. That's what he says. In Haskalah, quantity, misyachis, means it relates to and always includes some form of quality. Ukanal, like we learned earlier, Kunis Galil, Kunis Barlil, the Rebbe Seichens Perek Chav Beis. So a few chapters back, I'm just looking here. So he says, like we learned what we discussed earlier, Be'inya Rechiv Hasaga de Bina. Oh, yeah. One second, I just want to see it inside. Perek Chav Beis. Oh. Yeah, he spoke there about Chachma and Bina. The Chachma is an Akuda, and Bina develops, it breaks it down into different branches and details and subcategories and subcategories. Yeah, it's page 107 and 108. Bottom of 107, 108, if you want to look it up. Yeah, talked about the river and the Mayon. The Mayon is drops, and the river spreads it out, expands it. So he's referring to that now. So he says, a canal be'inya rechiv ha'asaga de bina. Like we learned earlier about the expansiveness. The rechiv is expansion of the comprehension of bina. Let me refresh. It's important to point this out. Chochmah is always the spark of an idea. We have thousands of ideas a day. Most of them we never even remember. So a spark of an idea means like a flash. Like let's say you're thinking of a solution to a problem, or you're learning something and you don't get it. Then suddenly there's a flash of recognition, a flash of awareness. You say, I have an idea. You have an idea, then you start thinking about the idea and you start developing it. Let's flesh it out. It's a good idea. You may reject the idea and say it's not a good idea. But if you don't reject it and you start developing it, it's entered now the phase of Bina. Bina is widening, expanding. It's like taking one point, one headline, and now, or like let's say when you make a business plan or an outline, you start with one point, and then you start fleshing it out into details. So Bina is essentially rechiv, because it expands an idea. Chachma doesn't have rechiv, it doesn't have expansion. Chokhmah is a Nakud, it's like a Yud. When the Yud becomes a Hey, that from Chokhmah became Bina. Sometimes in Chassidus it brings, even in Tanya, the Yud is the Zera, is the seed that the father supplies. When the seed fertilizes an egg, it starts expanding and it develops into a child. A fetus begins to develop. So the Yud is the Zachar, is Chokhmah, and the Hey is Ima, the mother, father and mother, Abba ve'Ima. That's why Chokhmah and Bina are sometimes called father and mother. So the mother is the expansive Keli, and the father provides the Nakuda, the spark. Now, this doesn't mean each of them don't have the other within them. It's just we're talking about in general. The point I want to make is that that's why it's called Rechiv HaSaga, the Bina. So what do we learn? Shemisparer l'riboi chalokim anofim v'sifim v'svaris. Exactly. So we learned back there, he gave a whole breakdown. Bina doesn't just take the idea and develops it. It really fleshes it out to the point almost like a tree. So he says misparer. We said like misparer means crumble. Misparer means you break down, you take one piece and you break it into pieces. Misparer. It crumbles. What other word did we use? Okay, crumble is a good word. It crumbles the idea, it breaks down the idea, l'ribui chalokim, to many parts, anofim, branches. The sifim is like chapters. Sifim is within the branches, like smaller branches. Like when you say a siman v'asif in Shulchan Aruch. So an anof would be like a siman, and a sif would be like the sif within the siman. No, it's basically categories and subcategories, visvaras, and theories or ideas. Like he discussed there at length. It's not relevant here so much. The point is that Bina is an expansive force that expands an idea and breaks it into, he calls it many parts, branches. Sifim would be subcategories, and Svaris, within each of them, there's many different ideas or theories. Shekol zeh hu ma'amayon de chokhmah. This is like a nahar, a river, an expanded river. Rechevus hanor is the expression. The Rebbe often brings it when he speaks about the Alter Rebbe and the Mittler Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe wrote things more briefly, chokhmah, and the Mittler Rebbe was bina, rechevus hanor, the expansive river. But it doesn't. But a river comes from somewhere. The river comes from the mayon of chokhmah. The mayon is very concentrated. It's much more powerful than the river, but it's not something you can bite into because it's only a concentrated point. So everything comes from the mayon of chokhmah. V'hainu, we're going to get back to mashpia makabel. He's just going back. V'hainu, this means shekol arichas hahesber de bina, that the arichas hahesber, the comprehensive explanation. Arichas literally means length, but it means the comprehensive explanation of Bina. All of it is B'nekuda de Chokhmah. It's all explaining. It's B'nekuda could be it's encompassed in, but I think here means it's also developing. It's all emerging from the Nekuda of Chokhmah. In other words, it's not coming a new idea. Bina is taking the spark or the drop, the concentrated drop of Chokhmah, and expanding it in all different directions. Hare, the Hakamas, the Bina, this is all coming to prove that the Kamas of Bina, Misyachas ima echus de Chokhmah. Oh, wow. Okay. Remember, before he said that the difference between a teacher and student or a Mashpia Makabel is a Kamus. He knows more, he knows less. But now he's qualifying and saying, but the truth is, the truth is that even though the fact is that in Seichel, it's like I said, not like apples. It's not like any physical thing. In Seichel, Kamus connects and relates to Echus, and he's bringing a proof from Chokhmah and Bina, that as much as Bina develops, which is really Kamus, that's what Bina is doing, it's taking one spark, it's not adding new ideas, it's taking one idea and developing it. So he says, so we see from this that the Kamus of Bina, Misyachas ima Echus de Chokhmah. Chokhmah is Echus. Chokhmah is the concentrated quality of the idea. In the Nakuda of Chokhmah lies great quality. Bina is kamus. But you see from this that Bina relates to the echus of Chacham. Bina is not just taking a drop of water and spreading it out. It actually relates to Chachma. Let's see what he's going to say. Okay, fine. Now, I'm not positive what he means by this. I think he's trying to say that even though Bina is kamus, it's expanding the idea, and you could think, okay, you know what, there's no echus there. That's not correct. That the Bina does connect with and relate to the echus, and in some way also adds to the quality of the idea. That's what it seems like he's saying, because if not, what's the proof here? He's trying to bring a proof that kamus and seichel is connected with echus, that quantity is connected with quality. So you can make the argument, how does Bina prove that? You could just say Bina is taking the chachma and spreading it out. It's only quantity. It would be like me giving you a concentrated little, let's say a concentrated capsule. And when you put it into your body, it spreads out to all your, to the bloodstream. There's no fundamental shift. There's no qualitative shift. It's only kamos. It's only quantity. But I think he's saying two things. That first of all, Bina relates to that quality. It's not just, Bina is not some blind expander. Bina is comprehending the idea. You're comprehending that quality. So that number one, so it relates to quality. Number two, even though he doesn't say it explicitly, you could say that by expanding the idea, you also come to expand the quality of it. You come to appreciate the quality. You come to understand it in a deeper way. He doesn't say this, but it seems like you have to say that because if not, Bina is not just taking something and spreading it out. It has to have some qualitative connection with what it's spreading out. That's what it sounds like he's saying, but it's very brief.
In one way, the other way, Chochmah is having it more bipshitus, more a whole one.
Fine, yeah, that's for sure. No one's taking away from the mile of Chochmah. Bina still needs Chochmah, but he wants to say that Kamus is connected with Echus, basically. Yeah, Mesiachazim Echus the Chochmah. That means there's a relationship between them. It's not just, as I just said, it's not like, I'll give you an example. I mean, I don't want to say by names. There was a certain person who's already in Elam Amos. They would say about him that he can explain an idea that he himself doesn't understand. Okay, I'll give an example. Let's say you hear a brilliant person speaking. He's giving a shir. Another speaking in Yiddish. And the English-speaking people want to hear a translation. Comes a translator, and he translates it. But he doesn't understand one word that he's hearing. He's just a good translator. He knows how to translate from Yiddish to English. I'm sure it'll be compromised to some extent if he doesn't understand. My point is, you could argue that, you know what, all he is a mashpech. Basically, all he is like a funnel. He's an interface. But with Bina Chachma, you can't say that. Bina is not just taking a point and just break. It's like if I would give you a little, let's say, I mentioned an apple. You take an apple and you chop it into pieces. That's not what Bina does. Bina develops the idea and it's Misyaches Chachma. Bina is not just a chopper of taking an idea and breaking it into parts. So there's a yachas between them. Anyway, regarding our point here, he's bringing proof that when you say mashpia makabel, that one is ribui and kamus, ribui and miut is kamus, he's saying it's not just kamus. Kol mokim, now he's going to say, nevertheless, even though it's true, there is quality also, qualitative difference between the mashpia makabel, the kol mokim, nevertheless, it's still ribuy and miut is a matter of quantity. It has a qualitative element, for sure, like we just explained, but its primary difference is kamus. Now, of course, you could have a mashpia that is qualitative, completely different than the makabel, but that's a unique circumstance. It doesn't have to be that way. In other words, you can have one person who's a teacher, one person who's a student. The teacher is different than the student primarily in quantity. However, because in seichel quantity is related to quality, there's also qualitative difference. Then you could have a mashpia that's completely different category. But that's what he's saying right now. So this difference of mashpia and makabel, that's kamos, is not really the fundamental difference on the level of haskola, because he says v'kol inyan haskola hu ha'echus v'lo kamos. When it comes to haskola, which means intelligence, what's the main strength of intelligence? It's not how much you know, it's the quality of what you know. Hu ha'echus v'lo kamos. Im kain haribu yamiyut the mashpia makabel. So if that's the case, the ribuy amiyut, which is the more and less of the teacher and student, this, that the mashpia knows many ideas, the ribuy and many methods of understanding, because he has that. That's what makes him a mashpia. Harizel levad. That alone is not yet the true quality of the mashpia, the true superiority, I should say, of the mashpia over the makabel.
Because it puts them both on the same level. And the same.
Okay, so let me explain. So far what he said is the following. He started speaking about that Helam and Gilui is different by Mashpia and different by Makabel. Even though everybody has that process of Chachma and Bina, first an idea, then the comprehension, but still there's a fundamental difference, he said. Be'efen achar legamri. But just the structure of how he built this up. He hasn't yet explained the main difference. But he said the first step was levadzes, besides the fact that there's a difference because one is mashpia, one is makabel. And one knows more and one knows less, which he says initially it's quantity. But then he said because it's haskola, it also has a matter of quality. But still, when you say more and less by a teacher-student, it's not the main quality, the main superiority advantage of the teacher, of the mashpia over the makabel, because in seichel, echus is the primary thing, not kamos. So to make the point that a teacher knows more, the mashpia knows more than the student, yes, is a point, but it's not the primary difference because at the end of the day, it's still more quantity than quality, even though it has an element of quality in it, which is what he just said. So what is taka the mila of the mashpia of the makabel, the true mila, the true superiority? So he says like this. Ki'im, what is that special, the real special superiority or advantage of the mashpia over the makabel? He says, Ki'im, rather, my losei ha'atzmi shel mashpia. Did I skip something here?
No, you did not.
Okay. McColman says, my losei ha'atzmi shel mashpia. Now he uses the word atzmi. The true core quality or advantage or superiority. I don't like the word superiority because we don't mean superior and inferior, but we mean mila means something that is greater than another. The true greatness, core greatness of the mashpia, hu guf ve'etzem efen haskolas v'asogas hamashpia. It's not the amount of information he has, the ideas, the concepts, or even the comprehensions. It's the guf ve'etzem efen haskolas v'asogas hamashpia. It's the very way he understands, he conceives and understands. So it's a completely qualitative, different level. Because the first thing we spoke about, you could say, okay, the teacher knows more. I'm a student. The teacher knows more than me. Since he knows more than me, there's also some eichus, like we said. But fundamentally, so he knows more than I. But once you say, no, the way, even what you and him both know, even the things you share, not just he knows more and you know less. Even the things you both know, he has fundamentally the guf etzem, the way he conceives the mashpia and understands an idea is in a different quality completely. Mashu be'efen acher legamri mikamay shu hasogas v'haskolas hamakabel. That this, his etzem, guf ve'etzem, efen haskolas v'hasogas mashpia, is what that's his maila atzmi, is that this, the way he understands something, is completely different than the way the makabel, the recipient, understands it. And what's the difference? Now finally, the Frierdiker Rebbe is getting to the real difference. So what's the difference? That the mashpia, the primary conceiving and understanding of an idea, is b'ha'etzem. He understands the etzem idea. Ulozeis, what means the etzem idea? In other words, not like a student may understand. We'll soon read what he's going to say. But I'll just give an example. If someone who's let's say someone who really knows Chassidus well, and he talks about Eir Ein Sof Lifnei HaTzimtzum to a student who hasn't really learned the subject matter yet. So this teacher knows the Etzem Ayin. He's immersed in it. He's struggled with it. He's become to a point that he knows the core idea. He's a master of the core idea, as much as one could be a master. The student is just hearing words and may understand the pshat, but can you say that his conceiving and his comprehensions in the etzem idea? No, you could say, the surface level, maybe you know examples for it, but you don't have the etzem. The mashpia is in the etzem inyan. Let's continue. Ulazeis, and because of this, ulazeis, and therefore, hine efen askolose vasagose, the manner of the way he keeps saying haskala and asaga, which is chachma bina, the way he conceives and comprehends, hu asher man hakude bo liispashtus. So now we're going to see how the Helam and Gilei work by the mashpia. That from the nekuda, from a nekuda of chachma, from a point, a concentrated point, comes expansion. V'amakabel ikra v'nosei. The makabel, on the other hand, his primary understanding, hurak bispashtus bolvad. He only understands the extension of the idea, the expression of it. So the mashpia who knows the etzem, so he goes straight to the core of the idea, and from there he expands it outward. The student only gets the outer dimension. Let me give an example. I'm giving my own example just to make this a little easier to understand, even though we haven't finished yet, but let me just say this example. Something I deal with all the time. People come to you, let's say, for advice. You're mashpia. They're the makabel. It's a good example. Okay. And they have a problem, a personal problem, a marital issue, children, whatever it may be. Doesn't matter what the issue is. They tell you what their issues are. Now, of course, they know what they are experiencing. But because they're not trained or they're not objective, they don't necessarily know what is the root of the issue. They know the symptoms. Like you come to a doctor, you tell them the symptoms. But the doctor, or in this case, the mashpia, because he's trained and he has experience and has a deeper understanding of the human psyche, he says, he may not say it to the person, but to himself will say, if this is the symptom, very likely, not always, but these are the usual suspects, the roots of what this could come from. It's usually not the symptom, obviously, not usually, always. So the mashpia can get to the etzem nekudas hadavar, whereas the makabel, initially at least, only knows the hispashtus hadavar. He only knows the expression of it. The same is true with any idea and concept. A person, if you come to someone, let's say you're learning Gemara, you have a question, Masechta Kedushin. You come to someone who's learned it and is a master, a sheshiva, a Talmud Chacham, a Magid, whatever it may be. He goes to the core of the subject. He hears your question. He's able to go to the core of the sugya and explain it from the root. Whereas you are just starting to learn it or learned it just quickly or just you're a beginner, will get the idea, but you don't get the root of the svara of the idea. So basically in Seichel, what he's saying here, This has nothing to do, this is not kamus at all. This is not more, knowing less. This is you simply have a different way of looking at it. A master or expert in any area looks at the same thing that a novice would look at with different eyes. Because of what all the reasons, his experience, his knowledge, his brilliance, whatever it may be, he just sees it in a different way. And the Aishis he's using, he sees the etzem of it. From the Nekuda, he goes to his pashtus. And the student, the Makabel, is initially, we're not talking about the Makabel can grow and become a mashpia too. We're not discussing that right now. We're talking about as long as this one's a Makabel, this one's a mashpia. Mashpia is the etzem inyan, and the Makabel has the pashtus inyan, which of course means the Makabel could make mistakes because it doesn't have it really gruntig. Gruntig means in a solid way. It's really got to the core essence of what the concept is. So this is a good litmus test when you learn something and ask yourself, you know the etzem and the kudas hadover, or you know the pashtus of the idea. That's essentially what he's saying. So bottom line, it didn't finish yet. Let's continue. It's a big arichas here. Mashu be'efanach l'gam mikmesha. L'zeis efel skos hasos v'rashabin kuda bolis pashtus and the makabel. Okay, is rak bis pashtus levad. He's pashtus levad. Ulechein, and that is why. Hine efen hasagose. Now his manner of understanding. Hu Hashem min havonis haprotim. Hu nimshech el nekuda. He's going back to the makabel. He's talking about the makabel. So the makabel works the other way around. The mashpia works from the inside out, from the etzem, the kuda to his pashtus. And by the makabel, his manner of understanding, Hashem min havonis haprotim, from understanding the details, hu nimshach el nekuda. He then extends or is drawn or continues on into the nekuda. That's beautiful. Exactly. The mashpia sees it from the inside out, from the nekuda to the pashtus, and the makabel from the pashtus he travels toward the nekuda. Yeah. I just want to see whether we should stop here or read the next section. I think we should stop because I don't want to rush it. I think we stop here. And then he's going to explain further. And then on top of the next page, he's going to go back to explain Ucham. What exactly does it mean that Kesed is dark in the presence of Ilus HaIlus, or a contrast to it, cause of causes. So let's stop here, close to the bottom of page 116.